Well, the political needle in the United States appears to be moving, and that will have consequences for the future of domestic policy, but also for the future of U.S. foreign policy. And this matters to the world. But we want to focus tonight on how America's political volatility is going from strength to strength. Is the news media fueling the feuding? My first guest tonight is one of the go-to people on the nexus of journalism and politics in America's Trumpian times. His latest book, which is due out in April, will be called The Future of the Presidency, Journalism and Democracy After Trump. I'm happy to welcome to the program tonight Robert Gutsche. He's Associate Professor in Critical Digital Media Practice at Lancaster University in the UK. He hails originally from the United States, where he worked as a journalist as well as a leading educator on the changing nature of storytelling in news. And that includes my alma mater, the journalism school at the University of Missouri. It's good to have you on the program. First things first, I have to ask you, the title of your forthcoming book, After Trump, after yesterday's election result in Virginia, how certain can we be that we are not in a Trump intermission? I mean, are you worried about having to change the title of your book?
Well, we changed it once already in pre-production. It was going to be post-Trump, but we realized that in saying that, we're not actually past Donald Trump yet. I think we'll just come out with another one if he gets in again. But I do think his influence is certainly there, even though he may be contained to rallies and maybe his own sometimes blogosphere that he tries to create. He still has an influence. He built up what's happening now. But I think Republicans are looking for a replacement for Donald Trump simply because he might just be too divisive for where they want to go. And Virginia was that testing water to see how far away from Trump they could actually get.
Yeah, well, let's talk about what happened yesterday in Virginia. Did voters in the Commonwealth, did they go to the polls equipped to make an informed decision about their state's next governor? Did the news media, did it do its job in educating to make sure that the citizens could make good decisions at the ballot box?
Well, I think that that's the challenge that journalists have been facing for several years now with mis and disinformation, but also with the polarization and fragmentation of digital news in particular. There just aren't, first of all, enough journalists out there to be covering the next presidential campaign, let alone midterm elections coming up and these elections across the country. There just certainly aren't enough journalists and outlets. There is far too much condensed into a few minutes of sound bites. And so the question really should be put to those voters. Do they feel that they're educated? I don't know that journalism has been able to do what it's wanted to do, be as good as it's wanted to be, certainly before the first Trump time in the campaign. But I'm just worried that there just aren't enough journalists to really educate fully any voter going to the polls.
Well, what about the content that the journalists are producing? The news media in the U.S. has pinned the governor's race in Virginia to the likelihood of a second Trump run for the White House. This connection, is this a logical, intuitive connection, or is this a fabrication of news editors?
Well, this is the horse race that we talk about in politics. I mean, this is the thing that journalists continually get on, and it's a speculative nature of journalism. That's one of the traits that journalists refuse to, I think, acknowledge, is their role in speculation. But they also would have a hard time selling this to an audience that has just been inundated with Donald Trump for the last 5 years. How do you tell somebody why this election is important without connecting it somehow to COVID, the economy, or Donald Trump? What else is out there on those on the airwaves? Yeah. What are people talking about at the grocery store? And they're still talking about those three things: the economy, COVID, and Donald Trump, or at least some of the values that they think that they were talking about while Donald Trump was in office, and certainly when he was running for president. So the bandwidth for the American citizen, average American citizen right now, seems to be really limited to those two or three areas. And so journalists have to find a way to approach and to get those audiences, and they turn to the stickiest words and ideas.
Yeah. And there's also the messaging from the political parties. The Democrats, they thought that they could win in Virginia by focusing on being the anti-Trump party. Did their message, did it stop working, or did they have no means to convey that message properly to the public?
Yeah, I mean, that's why this was a test, right? And unfortunately for Democrats anyway, they weren't able to bring that home. But Democrats have a history sometimes of missing the mark on really the pulse of working class Americans. Ironically, I think again, if they're not, they picked on the Donald Trump line, but maybe they should have picked on the economy line, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the Donald Trump area is so polarized right now that either you're so pro Donald Trump or you're so anti Donald Trump, and if you don't hit the right people with the right message, it's a tricky move. And it's clear that they need to learn lessons from this.
We hear time and time again that America's 2-year cycle of elections for Congress means that there is never an end to campaigning, and there's never a time just for governing. I mean, barring a change to the U.S. Constitution, what can the news media do to mitigate this never-ending droning of campaigning? I mean, this background noise is always there.
I mean, I actually remember the days of when CNN came out. They actually had national correspondents across the country that would get on planes, or they would travel to a story out of Denver, a local story out of someplace in the West. They'd be in the South. But we're seeing journalists continually move to the coasts, particularly moving into this swamp that Donald Trump said that he wanted to drain. They keep building it up and moving further away from Americans or citizens in the United States, and closer and closer and closer to the power elite. So I think they're losing a lot of the relevance and the legitimacy, and certainly some of the authority over how people are understanding politics today in everyday life and how politics influences everyday life. I think there needs to be a radical change in not just what we're covering, but where we're covering it from. There's a geographic component here as well, the proximity of the audience to the newsmakers and to the news itself. So I think that you're absolutely right. The election starts the day after the last election. And part of that has to do with this sophisticated focus that journalists have on focusing on data, on polling, on the speculative nature of what's coming, and not really a lot of reflecting or reflexivity on where we've been.
Yeah, this is a lot of territory to cover. We've done a lot for television tonight. Robert Gutsche, I appreciate your time and your insights. And please come back when your book is coming out. We'd like to talk with you again. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.